Hi, everybody. I'm London Pacheco George, if you have not met me yet. But I'm here to introduce Sean Harvey, who is Chief Compassionate Officer and Men's Coach of Warrior Compassion Men's Studio. What that means, he is going to explain, not me, but an overview of today's talk is Sean will share his story from Wall Street to Ellen Fisher to Interfaith Seminary to working to deepen compassion in hyper-masculine systems like police departments and the military. He offers insight into the personal transformation and spiritual awakening journey essential for entrepreneurs to live into their truth and carry out their soul-inspired missions. You'll talk more about your background, so I won't go into that deep. So thank you and welcome, Sean.
All right. Can y'all hear me? All right. So who knows what's going to come out of my mouth? So we're just going to go for it. Yeah? Oh, okay. All right. Cool. All right. So, like Lindy said, I'm Sean Harvey. And what I want to talk to you about today is this blend between social entrepreneurship and spiritual entrepreneurship. Now, how many of you have heard of spiritual entrepreneurship? Is it intriguing? Is it weird? Okay. So, I probably started out as an entrepreneur when I was 16. Louder? So I probably started out as an entrepreneur when I was 16. So when I was 16, I came out as a gay man when I was 15 and started a gay and lesbian youth group for the city of Dayton, Ohio when I was 16. And I was creating mission and vision statements before I knew what I was doing. That organization still exists today, 30-something years later, now serving all of Southwest Ohio, from Columbus to Cincinnati to the Indiana border, serving 80 youth serving about 80 youth at any one time. So that's kind of like when I started the journey. You could say then I was a social entrepreneur, seeing a social need and creating a response. So, over the course of my career, my undergrad was in industrial psychology. My first master's was in organization development. My second master's is in counseling with a focus in existential psychotherapy. And then I became an interfaith minister. So as a friend of mine said, I became an overeducated New Yorker. And as part of that, so when I was an undergrad, I think I couldn't figure out what I wanted. I think I had like 6 majors before I decided on IO Psych. And it kind of blended this piece because I kept saying, I still want to be of service. I still want to be able to make a difference in the world. And so I studied IO Psych, went the corporate route. And one of the things that happened in my 20s is every time I went for the money, the prestige, or the title, I would fall flat on my face within 6 months. But when I would go back to that experience when I was 16, and I would remind myself that I'm really about service, that's when my career would take off. So I lived in Chicago for 10 years. At 27, I sold everything I owned, got 2 duffel bags and a cat, and moved to New York. And lived in New York for 19 years. Now I live in Philly. But when I was in New York, one of the things, I was this kid that was in my teens harassed, bullied, ostracized. And so my counter to that in my 20s was to become hyper-masculine. And so I was playing the game in my 20s. In some ways, it worked really well. I was able to create a great resume. looked good on paper. And yet at the same time, I was miserable. I was struggling with sex and drugs. I was homeless when I was 28. So I was experiencing the downside, the shadow of what does it mean when you focus on your career, but you don't focus on your personal life. And what I've learned over the course of the years is that's the way for a lot of guys. We have a few roles that we are given that we can play. And from there, if we're not playing those roles, or it's not working, that's where I've found a lot of guys struggle. I'm going to get into that in just a second. So, played the game, was a college professor in my 30s, worked on Wall Street, was a consultant on Wall Street. And on my 40th birthday, I was still doing great, and at the same time, still miserable in my personal life. So on my 40th birthday, I gave it all up. Gave up teaching, gave up the career on Wall Street as my birthday present to finally just say, I need a fresh start. So from there, within 2 weeks, this opportunity came along at this company called Eileen Fisher, a women's fashion company. And I applied, interviewed for 8 months, got the job. And then my two bosses sat me down on my first day and said, so Sean, you have proven yourself in the interview process. We want you to stop proving yourself and learn how to be who you actually are. When you interviewed with us, you showed us your polish and you showed us your heart and your polish. We hired you for your heart, and we want to see less of your polish. We want to see you unfiltered. Now, first of all, who says that? But for me, that was permission to start taking down the mask, start discovering who I really was. 3 weeks later, I met Eileen's house with my team, and I found myself doing interpretive dance to a poem about a bumblebee finding her nectar while drums were beating in the background. When I did this, my boss comes up to me and she just starts laughing. She says, you know you're in a different world now, right? I was like, yeah, I'm getting that. And it really was. It was a company that, is anyone familiar with Eileen Fisher? Yeah? Okay, one, couple. So Eileen Fisher is very socially conscious. It's women-led. It's about 83% women, 17% men. And they're very creative, very profitable, very successful. So as I started to work at Eileen Fisher, I started to notice that being in this environment, I was transforming, and I also noticed that other men in the company were transforming. And when I would talk to them, what they would say is, my wife said, I am more patient, that I listen differently, that I stopped needing to be right all the time, and I started to be more curious, that I started to have more access to my emotional expression and all my emotions, and that I started to be more creative or tap into my creativity differently, and I was able to solve problems in new ways. And I said, there's something here. So Eileen Fisher also sent me to an artist commune for 5 months in Canada to learn how to incorporate the arts into creative facilitation. And that's where I heard the call to work with men. And you have to understand that I went to Eileen Fisher to never have to work with men again. And then getting this call, I was like, well, this is way beyond my pay grade. And it was the realization that this was a spiritual calling. And so now let's just start talking about what that means. So as a spiritual calling, there was just an intuitive knowing of this is what I'm being called to do. And the reality of the spiritual call is if you don't listen, if you don't pay attention, it's going to keep reminding you until you come back and get back on the path. And I think that's probably one of the big differences from a social entrepreneur to a spiritual entrepreneur. You don't really have a choice as a spiritual entrepreneur. Like once it finds you, it's going to keep taking you further. So once I got the call, I actually started out as the internal change agent for creative at Eileen Fisher, ultimately becoming the head of personal transformation and well-being for the company. Another aspect of the spiritual entrepreneur is the commitment to doing the personal growth work, to doing the spiritual growth work, and to connect to that something deeper. And so as I started thinking about it, and one of the things I learned at the Artist Commune was, the room can only go as deep as the facilitator is capable. So I can only do the folks I work with can only go as deep as I am willing to do my own work. And so from that standpoint, I knew the way my mind worked is if we're looking at systems that are crumbling, oppressive systems that are crumbling all around us. And as a systems thinker, as I was working backwards, I'm like, what's the Achilles heel to progress? And it's, white men in power holding on to power from a place of wounding as opposed to a place of healing. So what if we start working with these men to do their healing work? And so that was really the basis for what I was up to. And so from that perspective, I knew if I had to do the deep work, this was the soul work. This was the soul healing work. And so that led me to seminary. So I went to seminary for one reason, which is to do this work with men. So went to seminary, became an interfaith minister, and 2 days after I said my vows and was officially a minister, I got this video, and it was a buddy of mine had sent me a video, and I was moving from Spanish Harlem, New York to West Asheville, North Carolina. And it was the chief of police of the Asheville Police Department. Now, they had come into a Black Lives Matter protest, militarized, destroyed a medic tent, and made national news. And so this was basically a video from the chief of police going, we screwed up, I screwed up, we're reforming the department. If you want to be part of police reform efforts, email me directly. So in seminary, they say when you hear the call, you say yes no matter what. I had no clue about police. But the next day I emailed and said, my best friend in London, who's mixed race, will visit me in New York, but won't visit me in Asheville because he's afraid of being murdered by the police. That was my opening. And because of my credentials and my background, that led to a one-on-one with the chief of police. So from that conversation, when I got to Asheville, I met with the chief, and he had two asks. Can I help his officers deepen the level of compassion? Help his officers deepen their level of compassion. And two, create conversations between officers and community members to be able to humanize each other and create a new relationship going forward. Said yes. Now the thing about Asheville, though, is at that point, where they were in North Carolina, they lost 60 to 80 officers from resignations and retirements. So they didn't have the bandwidth to do any sort of training. But the way the universe worked, it kind of brought me with some other folks. And we took that idea from Asheville and actually turned it into a national initiative. And so it was me, FBI agents, military officers, police officers, culture transformation experts, masculinity experts. And we formed what we called Project Compassion, with the sole purpose of deepening compassion in police departments across the country. And we started, our first project was with Cook County Sheriff's Office and Cook County Jail, working with corrections officers. And so actually having been at the Artist Commune, I knew that we weren't going to be able to make any progress with these guys if we just started with like a heady conversation. So we did storytelling. And one of the guys on our team, he had been shot in a school shooting, and he was an FBI agent, which led him to become an FBI agent. That's the story we started with. But it brought everybody into the room, and so all the guys that were sitting there, all the corrections officers were sitting there, arms crossed. They just like melted, came into the conversation within like 15 minutes because they could really see themselves in this conversation and really started seeing the need for compassion. You know, not how do I be compassionate to others, but how can I start being more compassionate to myself, right? So we started building that up, and then the work with police led to the work with military, led to work with white nationalists, which led to working with extremists on the soul healing work of how to deepen compassion and how to bring love to the hate. So remember where I started though? Like, to get to this place, that's not something that I ever would have dreamed of, imagined, or wanted to do. At every point in this journey, I'd be like, I don't want to do that. No, I really don't want to do that. And when I realized, when I encountered my first white nationalist, and basically it was a Purple Heart Army veteran who was doing mindfulness and consciousness work with veterans. And we were overlooking the James River. And so I thought we were like connecting. I thought we were on the same page. And next thing I know, he said, yo, take a picture of me. And I took a picture. And as I did, he snapped the white power symbol. I was like, oh, fuck. What did I just see? I went to my spiritual guides, and I'm like, is this my audience? Is this who I'm supposed to work with? And he's like, yeah. You're here to work with the hardest to love, hardest to reach men, and to bring love to the hate. And of course I said, I don't want to do that. But I knew this was the calling, and so I knew I had to keep just going forward with it. So next time I'm in a conversation with him, you know, I at some point in the conversation said, yo, you know, working with cops and military, I'm going to meet my fair share of white nationalists and extremists. And he got uncomfortably dead silent. And I said, all right, Sean, what's in your toolbox? One, you are, you can't be a progressive or social justice warrior right now. You're gonna lose this person. But you are a minister. So I started talking to Jesus. I started talking about love, compassion, and deeper humanity, reminding him of his humanity. What that led to was him staying in the conversation, him engaging with this queer progressive, and being open to, you know, a different type of conversation. It got him to open up in a different way. And I knew, and I work with so many of my progressive friends who get really triggered when I talk about what I do. And at the same time, I'm like, your work is really important, but we don't have enough people going in to the front lines, engaging with these guys in this way to get them to even open up without committing violence. And often as an entrepreneur, what I say is, you know, this isn't about the money for me. This is about impact. This is how do I help reduce the number, and my metrics are often how do I reduce mass shootings, gun violence, shootings, and suicides. And that actually got, you know, our Project Compassion team met with Senate staffers. We actually had a meeting with Senate staffers the week after the Uvalde shooting. And so while they were trying to do bipartisan legislation, they still kept their meeting with us. And in that conversation, Senator Durbin's folks said, you know, our conversation focused on men's mental health, mass shootings, gun violence, violence against women, police suicides, and veteran suicides. And it became really clear what the that this was really one of the conversation that we just need to be having. Like this is what it looks like when these folks lose hope, and that this work really is about how do we create a sense of hope for those who have lost hope. So now bringing it to the bigger picture. A lot of the work that I do, that's really kind of my work to the extreme. But a lot of my work now is working with men across the continuum on how to do their inner work, how to come in and look at themselves, do the healing work where they're suffering. And what I often say is where men are suffering in silence. And by addressing the wounds that men have, where they often think that they're still where they are experiencing a lot of this and shouldering it on their own, and creating the space to be able to start to explore, come into, and create a sense of healing so they can liberate themselves. And what I often say is that work I do at the extremes gives us the opportunity to say, if we can do it with playing at the extremes, what can we do for men across the continuum, across the board, to be able to offer a sense of hope, to offer a sense of possibility, and to offer a sense of, seeing the world and experiencing the world in a different way. So that's essentially what I do. And with that, I think we can close and go to questions.
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much, Sean. So we'll open the floor to questions, and I want to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions. And hopefully I don't steal anyone's thunder, but I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. Maybe we can kick it off. So you talked about, you fell into this, what you described as hypermasculinity, right? And if I understood you correctly, you described that as, I guess, just doubling down on like your work life, right, and neglecting all of this more personal aspect of your life, and that the solution to that was being more authentic, right? So, and you saw some improvement from that, right? And so I wondered then if you can speak to, there is this narrative that the alternative might be the right path for people. And I just noticed this recently, on social media, endorsing this idea where you need to embrace these dual roles that particularly men play, where they are supposed to be. They have this public figure where they're supposed to be the provider, right? The economic sort of warrior. And they can create dual lives where they go all in with that sort of public persona, where they craft, right, this sort of fake persona about who they are. And they only get sort of relief or sanctuary from that when they go home. And but that this is a healthy way to live, that you need to sort of create that divide within yourself. But your experience, it sounds like going down that road may result in a lot of pain and sort of inner turmoil. So I don't know if you speak to maybe the value of that alternative path.
Well, I think you named it. When you talked about the alternative, the solution is authenticity, right? I think when we as men are given a limited number of roles and it has to look like this, wherever there's a should, we should do X, Y, or Z. Often for many, that's what it's relating to is, but is that really who I am? And so I think what often the social conditioning asks us to do is take on an inauthenticity. And so we start wearing the mask. We start playing into a limited definition of who we can be versus, I think, once we start doing this work, it gives us the opportunity to start being who we really are. And so that allows us to come into a different level of authenticity.
Yeah, and so, I mean, because, I'm concerned sometimes just as a field, as a discipline, entrepreneurship, that promotes this idea that we're changing the world, and there's a lot of economic rewards that come along with that, right? And so we've built up this sort of hustle culture, right, where you need to be this sort of economic warrior, right, and take on this role and this identity that may run very counter to who you think you truly are, and there's the potential where that could be pretty damaging, right?
But I think we're also in a burnout movement right now where we're seeing folks in organizations and entrepreneurs talking very openly about burnout, about, being in the hustle, and from that hustle, getting to that place of utter exhaustion, right? And I think it's like I think for a lot of guys, I think for a lot of people, but there's a breaking point, right? And I think this is one, once you hit that point of exhaustion or burnout, that's one place to go, let me recalibrate my life. It could be X number of failed relationships. Okay, it's an opportunity to look and say, how am I living my life? Playing the game, getting the prizes, and still feeling unfulfilled. All right, maybe it's time to take a look. Life spiraling out because of some sort of addictive, maladaptive coping mechanism. Okay, again, time to reevaluate. So I think there's these touch points, or when someone has a kid, and it's like, okay, that just brings a whole other perspective to how do I want to live my life. So I think there's these breaking points or touch points when you can start to come in and start to examine your life differently.
And then so, right, yeah, and I guess you have these, massive transitional moments in your life, right? Like having a kid. I mean, I've seen that in others with friends of mine. I don't have any kids.
Yeah.
To the disappointment of my parents, but yeah, I can see the value of that. Now, but you've also talked about spiritual entrepreneurship is something different than just social entrepreneurship, right? In that you're serving a calling, right?
Right.
Which is different than, I guess, identifying something, some kind of goal that you want to pursue, right? Because you're almost saying that you don't have a choice in it, right? But that this you described as part of a spiritual journey.
Right.
And you define spirituality in part as a process of transformation, right? So I wonder if you can speak to what that's like going through that transformation, how you can recognize whether there is a calling, and if there are tips that people can sort of look out for to embrace this path.
Yeah, I think it's I think the first thing that comes to mind is just deep listening. Being able to listen to that voice, that inner knowing. And a lot of times it could be your gut, but it's that knowing that won't go away. And it's unequivocal when you hear it. And it's different than the rational, analytical, or logical mind. And being able to hear that truth. And so I think in order to do that, it's how do we quiet the mind? So what are the practices that we have? What are the spiritual practices we have? Either be it meditation, be it somatic practices, be it creative practices, whatever allows the knowing to come through and to get into the practices of listening for the knowing and trusting ourselves. That's the challenge, I think, for a lot of folks is there's so much noise, right? Then we often get so distracted by what's going on out in the world that we're not actually listening to the wisdom and the truth that's within us. And so I think the spiritual path, the spiritual calling is, and my belief is we each have one. The question is, are we receptive to being able to listen for it? And are we willing to take the risks and sacrifice what it takes to be able to follow the path? When I left New York, I sold everything I owned. And lived in the mountains with shamans and mystics. I've done crazy stuff as part of this journey, but at the same time, what continues to open up and how big this thing is getting would not happen if I was just logically trying to plan it out and have a vision. And one of the things we had at Ollie Fisher was we had an Akashic Records reader. An Akashic Records reader is like an intuitive that gives you a sense of like how you're in alignment or out of alignment with your own soul DNA. So we had this at the company. And I remember I had a conversation with her once, and she said, Sean, it's great that you have a vision and a plan. Now I want you to let go of the vision and the plan, get out of the masculine and step into the feminine and walk from a place of curiosity and wonderment and let go of the need to control the outcome. And I think that, one of the biggest things about walking this path is that you relax the ego and you let go of, I've got the vision, I've got the plan, and that something is already in motion, that if I can tap into it. And what I found is the more I surrender into that unknown, the more this thing just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, at the end of the month, I'll be speaking to 400 police departments in alignment with the Department of Justice on how to deepen compassion in police departments. And then speaking with the American Psychological Association on how do we deepen compassion among men and boys. And so these things just keep getting bigger and bigger beyond anything I could have ever imagined. And that's often where I also get a sense of, okay, there's something bigger at play. And it's also the question is, okay, how am I connecting to the divine? How am I connecting to source? How am I connecting with God in this so that I'm a channel and a conduit for this work versus that I have the ego that I am creating this work.
And just to follow up, so would you describe, in this class we actually talk about rational approaches to creativity as an alternative to intuition,
Yeah.
But this is a good sort of counter to that, in that there is so much value in intuition. And so leaning into your intuition is being able to recognize that sort of signal amongst the noise,
Yeah.
and then a submission to that. And so you describe it in religious terms, that you're connecting to a God or
Well,
something like that.
spiritual versus religious.
And would you say that this is sort of the source of someone's intuition?
Hmm?
Okay, yeah.
I think it taps into the deep intuitive knowing that drives. We wrote an article for the Journal of Management, Spirituality, and Religion on the soul of the company at Eileen Fisher. And we asked employees, what is the soul of Eileen Fisher? And then the employees would say, well, it's Eileen. And they would say, Eileen follows her deep intuitive knowing and trusts her deep intuitive knowing more than empirically based data. She doesn't follow the numbers, she follows the intuition. And that turned into a $500 million company from $350 by following that approach. And so I think it just offers, another way to think about what entrepreneurship can look like and how we can be as entrepreneurs.
I agree. I don't want to take up all the time. Yeah.
Right.
Versus a lot of the things that we teach our students is kind of active agency of doing and experiencing, right? Would you say those two are contradictory? Because some people may say, surrendering means I just wait for the opportunity to come versus actively going out for something.
I often call this the dance of the ego, the need for control versus the permission to let go. And I think, for me, the more I'm able to listen to my intuitive knowing, the more I know when I need to pause, when I need to wait, and when I need to take action. And so it's a different, it feels like it's a different orientation. That it's not that I'm sitting in a place of complacency waiting for something to happen. But I'm also taking actions, but then also having a different patience with waiting to kind of see what the next step is, or to see what's opening up, or to not control things so much that it limits what the possibility is that could be much bigger than what I can imagine.
We just got out of a pandemic, and now, let's face it, the economy is just plummeted us.
Hmm.
So, are you seeing
I think the quickest and easiest is just find your own spiritual practice. Versus, I don't think this has to be so grandiose. I don't think this has to be, I'm I'm doing all the things right. I think it's about simplicity. And it's trusting that if I just take this action, it can open up X, Y, and Z. So I think finding the spiritual practice that connects you to the divine, to God, to yourself, to anything. And the way I often describe spirituality is, anything that transcends the ego. So it's a core belief. It's a core set of values. But when it goes beyond you, so I have a lot of friends who are secular humanists. I have a lot of friends who are atheists, who are agnostic. And I get to the place of, what do you believe? What is your core, deeply held belief? And from that place that goes beyond you, that's the opportunity for spirituality.
All right, any questions from the audience?
I'm sorry? Just having this conversation a little bit ago. I haven't found any. In my head, I'm often like, do I need to buy a gun? Do I need to get a bulletproof vest? But when I'm actually in the work, for whatever reason, these guys, they often say they feel safe, they feel that I'm non-threatening, and they feel like they can open up, and they're able to hear the message in a way that I'm always surprised. And so I've had a lot of conversations around safety. I think in my head it's worse. But I think what I found in reality is, if I'm coming from a place of love, right? And when people ask me, like, how is a queer progressive you can work with extremists? And I often say I've done my work. I've done my work that I can, as much as I abhor their views, that I can still see their humanity and I can see them in their humanity. I can love them in their humanity even if I adamantly disagree with what they stand for. And I know that often what they stand for leads to a life of suffering. And from that suffering, I often say I meet men in their suffering. These men in their suffering, I listen for their yearning, and I offer hope in the midst of both. Because often the violence comes from a place of hopelessness.
Follow-up questions?
What was your drive
My
when you finally figured out that, this is a spiritual path that I'm taking in life? What was your drive for you to keep on going?
That's a great question. I fought it a lot. This is and there were many easier off ramps that I could have taken. But I also knew that those times when I ignored the path, my life started to get even more difficult. And the reminders would bring me back on the path. And I did that a few times, and I realized, I don't really have a choice. The way this is set up, I don't really have a choice. But I also, one of the things I think is really important, I had a pretty strong conscious community around me who kept encouraging me, who kept challenging me, who kept asking me the questions, and that helped me keep going. And then I think as I would see the next success, as I would see the impact I was having, as I would see how lives were being transformed, that started to create a build. And then there was a certain point when it was just unequivocal to me that this was the path. And there was enough energy and momentum building and enough forces playing out beyond me to say that there's something here, and I just that even when it's hard now, and the days of me wanting to just walk away are fewer and fewer. But those days when it's really hard, I have an amazing network in community that remind me why I'm doing what I'm doing if I can't remember it myself. And I remember what's at stake by not doing it. Because there's not a lot of people doing this. There's definitely not. There's not. It's a very, it's a pretty unique calling.
We're all in the business of something, right?
Yeah.
So when we think about your spiritual journey as an entrepreneur, how does that business side, right? Are these groups sort of engagement with the communities that you're dealing with? How does that business side?
That's always evolving. That's always evolving when you look at the financials of it. So what I've had to do is look at what creates baseline income that just allows sustainability for everything else. And so I go to what's the bread and butter of that. And that tends to be coaching for me. So that can be like a quick 10,000 each time to just keep the revenue going. Then I had to look at, so what are my gifts? What is that thing that I am so good at that my mind operates like a computer? And so that became facilitating and training facilitators. And then I look at it from a systems perspective. Systems perspective of how do I get to the conversations that I need to be having with the folks who are in power that can offer funding, that can offer opening or can offer the opportunities to come in and consult. So it's really, when I was doing my master's in organization development, one of my professors said, like 20-something, 30 years ago, one, it's not how big is back then we used to call it a Rolodex, and it's not how big your Rolodex is, it's how fat is it? So how many people do you know? And how many tools are in your toolbox? And so I think that, looking at what does that network look like? And then second, how do I keep building the skills to keep advancing the work? And then really paying attention to which skills am I acutely skilled in that people will be willing to pay money for. So it really is layered. And it varies. And so when people ask me what I do, it's often, I'm like, it depends on the day and it depends on the moment. It depends on how I feel, how I describe it.
So you're basically not working. You're an entrepreneur, just casually walking day by day and hoping or if you can stumble into something.
No.
So you have a business.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain more about your business?
Yeah. So the business itself is one, doing consulting with organizations. And so doing it's really like 5 different things I do. One is speaking engagements, which provides the opening to the work. 2 is consulting organizations on how to engage men. And then also the work we're doing with police departments on how do we work with specific police departments. So the consulting projects. Then the training facilitators to be able to do this work. And then being able to do individual coaching with leaders. So there's really about 4 or 5 different parts of the business that are revenue generating.
So my question is, what made you target internal flaws within men? And then when you came to the conclusion about these internal flaws, was it via experience, in your intuition, or was it facts, via psychology or something of that nature?
Combination.
Combination.
Combination. So part of it is, in the book that I just wrote, was really outlining my journey and then what were the aspects of healing. So kind of a roadmap for healing. And at the same time, having studied psychology and been in this work for over 25 years, and worked with leaders and male leaders, and in those conversations, identifying like what were some of the main challenges that men experience, and what they were talking about. And then also, as writing my book, the conversations I had with men in terms of what were the challenges they experienced, what was the healing like, what was their journey.
Yeah, because a lot of what you said has even like corresponded with even my daily life, so I found it very interesting. So thank you for that.
It did or did not?
It did.
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's, regardless, there's our own unique experience. And then there's also just what's common among men and that we just don't talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is when we just start talking about it, men,
Vocalizing what you feel,
yeah,
It brings a certain type of growth that
yeah,
most people can't reach because they just feel like they can't open up.
right,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I dealt with that for a very long time myself. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And when you have that opportunity to just start having those conversations, that's when that awareness comes. Then you can name it. So then, and you realize you're not the only one dealing with it.
Yeah, you get to see it in other people.
Right.
too.
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
see like a reflection of yourself, like even in the past.
Yeah.
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 I have a question.
Sure.
This is more so I can like help someone, but there's this someone that I know is dealing with a lot of guilt
Hmm.
in their life, and like they maybe turn to kind of God a little bit to seek that forgiveness for that guilt.
Hmm.
How can like I help them? Like what can I like what part can I do in like helping like ease that guilt for them?
Well, I think first, often we want to go in and we want to fix, we want to save, we want to stop, like the pain, right? And a lot of times, some of the best things we can do as a friend is just listen. Is just to be with them and just to listen. Yeah, to not come in and say, let me come in with the answers, but to just really be curious about, okay, tell me more about what's going on.
I agree with that. I think sometimes people are so hardwired into seeing like solutions and
Right.
certain answers to someone that they forget that sometimes all people really need is just someone to listen in a calm manner that people aren't really used to.
Yeah,
Sometimes people really turn to others and stuff, but when they turn to other things and whatever, they don't really get that comfort that they seek, that calmness that they seek.
right,
That advice becomes kind of assertive and just it seems forced upon you. It
right.
may not be the advice you need at times.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I often,
Just being a listener.
yeah. Just being a listener, I often think like, what society tells us is we want to fix the problem. And as guys, we want to fix the problem. And often this is less about fixing the problem and healing the wounds.
Yeah.
And part of that healing the wounds is being able to just kind of be with. So they know they're not alone. They know they're not going to be ridiculed. They're not going to be judged. And that you're just there to listen. You're just there to, and you might offer questions, but you're not there to try to like take the pain away from them, because that's their journey.
So when do you think it would be appropriate to all listeners to come like give them a different perspective?
Might ask them, what do you need?
Yeah.
Do you just ask, like, do you want advice? Do you, like, because a lot of times it's what do you need right now? Do you need resources? Do you want to take action? Are you still in it?
So what do they want?
Yeah, what do they want?
What outcome do they want? Like what answer do they want?
Or what do they feel they need in that moment? Which may be different than what they need the next day.
So, question, what
Yeah.
is, let's say, spiritual things that you earlier during,
What do you mean?
Like, did you see anything physically, spiritually? Like,
Hmm.
what deems you as a spiritual entrepreneur?
What deems me? I think a lot of it is, if I look at the whole experience as a whole, if I look at,
I mean, we're all spiritual people.
right, we are.
Just have to ask you that question.
Yeah. In terms of, I think I had a number of different experiences when I was in seminary. And, there were experiences that just really offered tapping into parts of myself that I hadn't tapped into, or tapping into a knowing or an insight. In terms of seeing things, that wasn't as much of my experience.
Okay. Are you like, so basically, do you have the power to like change your own destiny? Like, as you're on the journey as an entrepreneur? Like, can you like talk to your insight and like, you know what, this is a little too hard on me. Can you like change it and like kind of like direct you in a different direction?
That hasn't really been the way I've approached it. It's been, for me, it's not been as much of, let me change this. It's more of, let me listen deeper to what is my highest self, what is my intuition telling me in terms of what's next, or even just what I see opening up in front of me that I couldn't even imagine had opened up. And then it's like, and that often there's just, again, tapping into, for me, that knowing of, oh, this is the next step, or this is where I need to go next. And so for me, it's a more of a, it is more of that listening, as opposed to feeling the need that I'm going to drive this in a particular way.
So it's like you're saying patience, the way you say is kind of for like, I guess, but a quicker way of getting things done.
I think
So
I'm
what I was talking about is more like trying to expand reality spiritually,
hmm.
and you basically stated that you just it's more of a
Like just allowing it to come to you.
Like a receiving.
Yeah, it's more about
It's more of a receiving, and
like
that's
you're kind of you're
Yeah.
kind of like going out, changing something. So
yeah. I'm actually thinking about like changing the directory of someone's course of life.
yeah.
yeah. A lot of my peers, we talk about this striving versus receiving. So that being in action, which is what we're often conditioned to do, and being able to just receive, and being in that process, which is a different state of mind, a different way of being.
I just wanted to add on to what you were saying about like changing something. You said you had a conversation with like a white nationalist
Hmm?
or whatever, and like you had to like change your perspective in the conversation to kind of get him to see another side or whatever. You said like how you, instead of using like a different form, you used preaching like Jesus and stuff like that
Hmm?
to really like get to. How do I like? How do I get someone to see like what their action is or what they're continuing to do is wrong? Or should I even get someone to even see that they're doing is wrong? Like that probably is their path. Like how can I get someone to tell them like, yo, what you're doing right now is like not right without offending them or without like making myself seem like a bad friend, you know?
Hmm. Well, I think the question is, what's right and what's wrong, right? As opposed to, if you're seeing the behavior, this is the impact that I'm seeing, or this is the impact I'm experiencing. Versus, so it is more of a matter of what is, versus putting a value judgment on if it's right or wrong, good or bad. Because I think someone can hear it differently in terms of this is the impact versus someone coming in saying what you're doing is wrong. And what I've learned along this journey is to not wrong someone in the process. But the flip side of it is, but I can share with you what the impact of it is on either me or others, which then takes some of the twinge out of it, takes some of the bite out of it.
So you're compromising, saying like you understand the person's concept, and then you kind of just show the impact and how it would affect the future, right?
So,
Makes sense?
so here's often when I think about spiritual understanding or deepening spiritual understanding, what I often see it as my my job is to discover my own truth beyond all my protective layers that I have created that have been my mask. So when I can discover my truth and then striving to see someone else in their truth and to accept both truths as true versus one truth being better than the other. And that's really, I think, the journey of coming to a place of acceptance. And in that place of acceptance, that's where I think there's the opportunity for a different type of conversation, a different type of connection, and a different type of relationship, and a different type of building a bridge.
That's the first step. Would be acceptance.
Well, first, look within yourself, beyond all the tapes, all of the
Boundaries you got built up.
the walls you've got built up, yeah, and the protective layers that you've been holding on to that are operating from a place of should versus who you really are.
So if someone does get the call,
Yeah.
I mean, you talked about part of how you can turn that into an entrepreneurial opportunity is building out your network and increasing your skills, right? So can you just speak to if someone, because a lot of students, like when they think about entrepreneurial opportunities, it's usually along the lines of doing some kind of social good.
Right.
So I know that's on the minds of many of my students, but it's often hard because it's not like, a restaurant, whatever, to see how you can convert that into an entrepreneurial opportunity. We've had questions about how you monetize the work that you do. Yes, if you just speak to how you can take that real concrete step if you do get the call.
I'm reminded of a retreat that I was facilitating. It was a church in New York that they had sold the building, and they had $10 million to spend. And so they weren't going to replace the church, but they were going to create an incubator for spiritual entrepreneurs. So they were going to fund spiritual entrepreneurs to be able to go out and do their works in the world. And so as the facilitator, one of the things I was able to do is get, what are the criteria they were looking for. And I think one part of it is mission and calling. How are you contributing in the world? But I think a distinction, probably from social entrepreneur to spiritual entrepreneur, was the personal growth and the personal transformation work, the commitment to really doing the deep work within yourself, and then being able to commit. And one of the questions they ask is, are you willing to invest 100% of your energy into this initiative? So into your personal growth and into the mission and into the work. So I think it's that element of that commitment to personal growth.
And it's interesting. So was this organization, were they local or?
The church was in New York,
Okay.
in the city of Manhattan.
So is your calling given to you once you reveal your gift? Let's say if your gift is singing, you should be a singer, or is it just a calling that's given to us?
Yeah, I don't think it's that direct. I think it's connecting of dots and different experiences that start to illuminate what that is. But it's and that gift, that dance might be part of it, singing might be part of it, but it's probably going to be something bigger than just that calling. But that may be a contribution of your unique imprint on how to be able to do that. Right.
So, wouldn't you argue, or maybe, because you said like path was so concentrated to spiritual entrepreneurship, wouldn't you argue that maybe by that definition that every true social entrepreneur has to be a spiritual entrepreneur? Because sometimes, you see social entrepreneurs make it about themselves, to thrive on impact, but centering themselves in a way that it's really about their transformation.
Yeah.
It's about the recognition they get for the good that they do, and without it diminishing the good that they do.
Right.
But they're still centering themselves in their way that often I feel detracts from the core mission,
Mm-hmm.
which is to transform society.
Yep.
To, I think, engage in a meaningful exchange that ultimately, enriches the lives of many, including yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But I would argue it cannot happen by prioritizing you above the very people that you try to serve.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
Agree with that, or is this challenging your notions of
no, I agree with that. Because I think it's to get to that place of the relaxed ego is the personal transformation work that's required, right? So I think social and spiritual, they can go hand in hand. I think there is more of a surrender on the spiritual path. You may have more of the aspects of traditional entrepreneurship, more of the driving, more of the planning, more of the visioning. That's probably happening more of a social entrepreneurship. Spiritual entrepreneurship, I think there is more of that. You're following the calling, and it's guiding the way, and it's opening the doors. So it's a different orientation, but I do think you can be a social entrepreneur, and as you're doing the spiritual work, that it is going hand in hand. So.
Can you just comment on the difficulty of identifying your calling, right? Because we've had a couple of questions, struggling with, bending reality, right?
Right.
Do I want to follow another path, or maybe you've identified a particular innate skill that you have that can bring value to the world, but how can you be clear that you're on the path that you're called to, rather than serving your ego?
I think it's that path that keeps coming back to you, even as you reject it or push it away. And then you get to a point where you realize, oh man, this is the calling. Like I think it's one of those things that finds you versus you seeking it out. Again, it's that receiving, and I think it's going to keep, because it's like, what is your soul's call? If we really get down to it, what did you contract with the divine before you came into this lifetime that you were going to do in this lifetime that was either going to refine the spirit, refine your soul, learn, educate, contribute. So it's really, I think, more the personal transformation work is just coming into your truth, your authentic truth, and just peeling everything away. And that's why the personal transformation aspect of it is so key.
I remember I heard something that I feel like, I don't know if you can agree with, but everyone is going to find themselves at a certain point in life, maybe not, but they feel like they're at rock bottom.
Hmm?
And someone told me that when you find yourself there, it's going to be okay because that's where all the answers are, in a sense. But to your life, if you find yourself at rock bottom, that's where all the answers are.
So when I was preparing for this, one of the thoughts I had, or one of the things I wanted to share was, when we think about purpose and we think about mission, and that thing that is our calling, it's often that aspect of ourselves that we've grappled with over the course of our lives. That is one of our core challenges, that thing that would take us to rock bottom. And often within that is the answer, is part of the answers of what, by dealing with, by addressing, by healing it, by fixing it, that's then what we can then offer to others from the insights from it. So I think there is some connection to what you're saying.
All right, if there isn't any last questions, I think we'll wrap it up here. I want to thank you again. It was really enlightening, really interesting, very different. So I'm glad we had the opportunity to expose to these very interesting ideas. So round of applause for our guest speaker. Thank you so